another one. Neville Goddard is a third. So these authors have all written about this stuff as well. But I continue to apply this in my everyday life, and it continues to help me get results for what it is that I'm looking for, okay? So the way I think of the conscious mind, this is our everyday thinking mind. This is when we wake up, we make a decision on what we're going to eat for breakfast. That's our conscious mind making a choice, right? We decide, for example, that we want to go watch a movie on Friday night. This is our conscious mind making choices and making decisions. So these are, a lot of times I posit the 5 sensory data that we get from the outside world. This is part of our conscious mind too. And so this is where we also have our imagination. This is where we imagine the things that we want in our lives, and we imagine the things sometimes that we don't want, right? Anyone in here have any exams or any big kind of events coming up? Yeah, when we have these events, we have our imagination. Now, how often does our imagination wander over to, what if I don't make the grade? What if I don't get this score I need? What if, right? So we're operating on that sense of fear, right, that's there. So all of these, the reason I draw these arrows here from 5 sensory data, and I say here the conscious mind is the watchman to determine what gets into the subconscious. The conscious mind is the watchman to determine what gets into the subconscious. So let's just take an example. Let's say I have a goal and I want to lose weight. I want to lose like 20 pounds, say. That's my goal, right? And I set out to do that. And I start a workout routine. I've never really worked out before. And I go to the gym the first week. I go 3 times to the gym. And afterwards, I get a little complacent. What happens? I start to slow down and I stop going. I get tired or whatever. I might make an excuse. But really what's happened is this. For the rest of my life leading up to this point, I've never been a gym person. So my subconscious mind, the unconscious mind accepts what the conditioning says to it. So for 28 years or 35 years, however old I am, I've been somebody that hasn't worked out. So now all of a sudden I'm trying to work out. What does the subconscious mind say? Sorry, we don't do this. This isn't us. We don't work out. That's not what we do, right? So when you try those first 2 or 3 times, you might get to the gym by a force, right? By this kind of, you force yourself to go and you do okay. But then you have to override the old program that says, what do I do when I get out of work? I go home and sit in front of the TV and I watch Netflix and I eat Cheetos, right? If that's the old program, that's what you're used to doing. That's the habit force that's in play. And the subconscious will constantly want to give you that equilibrium. So you've got to rewrite that old programming. So all the stuff that came in before, the 5 sensory data, what's the 5 sensory data say? I look at myself in the mirror, what does it say? I'm out of shape, right? I'm not in good shape. I'm out of shape. I've always been this way, right? The conscious mind. And then what are we letting into our system? We might say that's just a reality. That's just the way that it is, right? So here, past conditioning. These are the things that happen to us in our past that affect us too. Traumas, beliefs. Is anyone in here trauma-free growing up? Good God, nobody, right? So we all have these things that tell us, and these things seep into our subconscious too, right? Here, I like to say emotions and the stories one tells about these emotions, because this is the part where this also seeps into our subconscious mind. All of a sudden, we have emotions that we experience, right? And if you're a guy, there's certain emotions that are acceptable in our culture, which are what? Probably anger, right? Anger and aggression are 2 of the ones that are more acceptable. But usually anger hides what? What's underneath anger? Hurt, sadness.
And fear.
Fear, yeah. So we hide those things. So all this stuff gets into our subconscious mind. It gets into this subconscious mind. And then the subconscious, it works tirelessly to render the reality that the conscious mind delivers to it, okay? So a good metaphor to think of this is think of the conscious mind and what you consciously think about, your imagination, the 5 sensory data that you take in, as the captain of the ship, okay? The subconscious mind is all the crew that operates everything, right? So the captain is up on the bridge, has a view over everything. In every order that the conscious mind gives, the subconscious addresses that order without question. It goes forward without question on what it is that you say, okay? So people who believe that money is evil. They have a belief that money is evil. So that might be from past conditioning, right? They may have had that belief from a family or people in their family that say, look, money is evil, right? They start to believe money is evil. That seeps into their subconscious. So what is the subconscious going to try to create for people who believe that money is evil? Money is bad, right? So it's gonna work to create an inner reality that says money is bad, and then what's going to happen in the outer reality?
You're gonna project that to your reality, and you'll fear money and owning money, and you want to get rid of it as quick as possible.
Yeah, and people will not know why. They will not know why. They will spend their money, right? This is why somebody wins the lottery, right? What happens usually within 3 or 4 years?
They blow the money.
They file for bankruptcy, right? They blow all the money. They file for bankruptcy. Why? What it is past conditioning of I'm poor, right? Money is evil, and the world is out to get me, right? All of a sudden, all the money comes in. Millions of dollars come in. The subconscious conditioning is still there. Now, if they did the reprogramming of the subconscious, they could totally change that, right? If they change the story from, hey, money's evil, to, wait a minute, money's not evil, but maybe the love of money more than everything else is evil. But money's actually good, right? If that's the new thinking, all of a sudden what happens is we start to reprogram this. Right? We start to have a new story about what this actually means. Okay?
So like epiphanies and stuff, would that be the conscious mind triggering the unconscious?
Yeah, so an epiphany is interesting because I look at it as it's the bubbling up of the subconscious mind, but the way I see it is the subconscious mind connects to, I would say, what I call the universal mind, which is the all, which is everything that's out here. So when you think about the universal mind or the all, the everything that's there, it's those times where you might be thinking about a question you have in your life. Should I leave my job, right? Then all of a sudden a song comes on, and in that song, you get a message, right? And that message is like clear as day. And all of a sudden you're like, where the hell did that come from? Or you're thinking about somebody and then they call you, right? Mm-hmm. So what that is it's your subconscious mind tapping into that all. And the more that you're kind of aware of this connection to your subconscious and you tap into some of that power in the subconscious, the more that you open up to those possibilities, right? So if you think of it this way, everything is always first imagined and then built, right? This room that we're in right now, right? Somebody had to imagine this space and then go about and create this space. But it didn't exist before, right? So 110 years ago, we didn't have man-powered flight, right? It was a dream of many people to be able to fly, right? To be able to fly without, with man-powered flight. So 150 years ago, if we went around to people and said, yeah, I think someday we're gonna be able to fly, they'd be like, you're crazy, a little bit crazy, right? But that's why I say here, the imagination can override 5 sensory data if it's powerful enough, okay? Imagination can override 5 sensory data. So again, if I'm that person that's 50 pounds overweight, right, and I really want to lose weight, I have to be able to imagine the feeling of having lost the weight already, as if it's already done, as if it's done. There's no question about it. There's no doubt whatsoever. Because if I make my imagination say, I want to lose 50 pounds, that's what I want, there's still a sense of lack that you don't have it yet, right? You don't have the thing that you want. So the unconscious mind does not distinguish between right or wrong, bad or good, up or down. It just takes orders. So when you say, I want this thing, there's still a sense of lack that's there, right? But the way to actually do it is to say, it's already done, right? With the Wright brothers, the ones who actually created man-powered flight, they had an imagination that one day we're gonna fly, right? People don't know this, but there was actually a team or many, many people around that time that were trying to fly and were trying to build man-powered flight. And there was one gentleman who had like $70,000 from the Defense Department, which at that time is like $250,000, $300,000. He hired a team of the most brilliant minds of the day, all these brilliant engineers and aviators to try to build this flying machine. Why don't we know about this guy? We don't know about him because, one, he didn't have the right imagination for why he wanted to fly, right? The reason he wanted to fly was he wanted to be famous. And that's what he wanted.
Make money, yeah.
Yeah, he wanted to be famous. So that was his goal, is to be famous. He ended up not getting there. The Wright brothers ended up getting there. But the reason they got there is they had a burning desire to get there as well. So that mattered quite a lot. Yeah, mattered quite a lot.
The passion behind it.
So it's the why factor. It's the motivation you have behind the thing. And then it's the willingness to ignore the five sensory data. Not necessarily ignore it, but to override the five sensory data. So when everything is telling us, look, this thing will not go, this thing will not work out this way, you're always going to have that though. So if somebody decides to start a business, they go to tell some of their friends. Half their friends are going to tell them it's a foolish idea, it's never going to work. The other half will be like, yeah, seems interesting, sounds like a cool idea, right? If that person in their conscious thinking starts having a lot of doubt swirling around about the thing that they're trying to create, that feeds the subconscious with doubt, right? Feeds the subconscious with, what the heck is this, right? What's going on? And then when the subconscious is getting mixed messages, what does it do?
It doesn't do what it was supposed to do.
It doesn't do what you consciously want. You'll find that roadblocks will come up, right? Going back to the idea of losing weight, all of a sudden you're consciously saying, God, I want to lose weight. And then later in the day, you're watching your television program and 14 ads come on for Doritos and every kind of sweet food you could possibly imagine, right? There's all this information, right? It's coming in through five sensory data. It's coming down. Is there a watchman here to actually stand guard and say, wait a minute, that's not for me. That data that's coming in from the Doritos ad or from the Ding Dongs or from the, you name the sweet tooth thing that they're trying to sell you, is there a watchman here to stop that from getting into your subconscious, right? And that's the key, is that we realize that we have to be the watchman of how we think, because how we think is what we become, because the subconscious mind will recreate everything that we think about, everything that we kind of believe in that conditioning, right? So if you look at what the world's best athletes do, one thing that they consistently talk about is visualization. They visualize the thing that they have, but they don't visualize it as if I want this thing. They visualize it as if it's already done. So if you interview or talk to people who are at the very top in athletics, or people who are brilliant musicians or brilliant dancers, for example, they will visualize the entire routine as if it's already done. And they'll even visualize the end part when they finish. What does it feel like to stand on the stage in front of thousands of people? And they plant that feeling months in advance, sometimes years in advance, to what the event actually is. And they replay that over and over and over and over again in their minds. And when they do that, what's happened is all of a sudden, that power of imagination creates an imprint in the subconscious mind. All of a sudden, the subconscious mind is like, it's done. It's done. There's no question about it. And when the subconscious mind knows that it's done, what it does at that point is it really starts to influence the outer reality. All of a sudden, things will show up. It's like, how did that show up that way? Okay? So I want to share with you a way that I did this in my life. So last year in August, I had a definite goal of bringing in more income, but I had a second goal attached to it. I didn't want to work hard for it. Okay, how many people sometimes would like that? Yeah, I wanted more money, and I didn't want to work hard for it. I didn't want to spend a bunch of my time working hard for this. So I started meditation in the beginning of July, and what I said was, I'm earning additional money right now, and it feels great to not have to work really hard for it. The money comes in and it's easy, and it just flows in naturally. There's no worry on my part that it's coming, because it just naturally comes in. And so what I do is I repeat this over and over again. And I actually made I created a mantra, and then I recorded it, right? So I recorded myself saying this, and then I listened back to the recording over and over and over again, okay? So in August, I went to an event, and one of my friends was there, and he came up to me and he's like, there's a guy who's here who you know, and he's actually looking for a room to rent. Didn't you tell me that you were maybe looking for someone to rent a room? And I was like, yeah. And I knew this guy from other events that I'd done before, and he's a great guy. He's like, yeah, I just got a job in Orlando, but I live on the coast and it's a real problem. I said, well, I've got a room if you're interested, right? So by the end of that month, I had a guy who was renting the room, and a really good fit for me too, right? Somebody who aligns with my values, somebody that I trust had moved in, and all of a sudden there it was, right? So, and some of us are gonna say, well, that's just, hoo-hoo, and it's just timing on these things. But try these things out in your life. Try manifesting something that you want by giving yourself messaging that the thing you want is already done, and see what happens. Did you wanna add something or say something?
I was gonna say, it's kind of like, I saw this movie called The Secret.
Yes.
And then, well, for me, I've been doing kind of the same thing in my life, but I use prayer.
Yeah.
Mine's a little different.
Yeah.
But I want to get into the meditation. But the mantra thing, I would feel weird listening to myself. So, like, I look up mantras from other things on YouTube.
I did the same thing.
Okay.
So for me, for a lot of time, it was like I didn't want to hear my own voice because, and I think that's just a natural thing because, when I first, and I like had to get over this to like make some YouTube videos and to make some stuff that was content created stuff that I wanted to do. It's a process of listening to your voice and getting over it. But when you mention prayer, prayer is very much a part of this whole continuum of tapping into. So I could basically write prayer across this way too, because that is very, I should probably just write it there because it's very much along those lines.
I was gonna say, it's my center, it's my go-to, it's what lets go of my stress.
Yeah, and so what you're doing here is when you pray, you're probably putting yourself into a calm state.
Sometimes I'm screaming.
Right.
It just depends on the day.
Yeah. Depends on what's going on.
Just releasing it.
Yeah, and it's a release point. And in some ways, what you're doing is you're tapping into this. You're tapping into this subconscious when you're doing that, and it's a phenomenal way because what it's building is like faith and trust.
Oh yeah.
Faith and trust are in your physiology. Faith and trust is in your neck. It's in this top two vertebrae of your neck because that's the thing that like holds your head onto the rest of your body. So your faith and trust is right there. It's a very tenuous point, right? It's a very because if you get a spinal cord injury that's above a certain point, those are the dangerous ones. This is your faith and trust right here in this neck area. And so when you're doing that, you're working on this, this area is right here where that faith and trust really is. It's a practice though, and I would always say the thing is self-acceptance. Accepting yourself for who you are.
Forgiving yourself.
Forgiveness, self-acceptance are critical for this too, because when we hear our own voice, to try to hear our voice without a sense of judgment, because when we are critical of our own voice, it stifles us from developing our voice so that we can use our voice to do the things that we want to do. So it goes back to the stories we tell ourselves, right? Past conditioning. Like, my voice isn't that good. I don't have a good voice.
No one
and so
listens
forth.
to me.
Yeah, those past conditionings are things that we want to go back in and rework. Because if we rework some of that, we start to realize, well, wait a minute, that's just the story I told myself. That I was the watchman, and I said that it could get into my subconscious. I was the one that let it in. Yeah. So it's definitely a challenge to practice too. That's the other thing. It's definitely practice. Yes, sir.
Going back to what you said about you meditated to expect a better financial situation, right? Would you say that because you meditated, you set up like an expectation in your mind, and so you were more aware of the opportunity when you came?
Yes.
And if you hadn't meditated, the opportunity still would have come, but you wouldn't have seen it as an opportunity.
Yes, that's exactly right. Okay. So what you're doing when you're creating that sense that the thing is already done is you're doing exactly that. You're making yourself more aware of opportunities to do the thing that you want to do, because the universe is limitless. There's just limitless potential all around us all the time, and we close ourselves off to that potential because of our limited thinking. We limit ourselves.
Our limited senses.
Yeah, and our limited senses. Yeah, so our five sensory data limits us too. So there's these things that limit us, but there's so much there when we really fully believe that the thing is already completed, right? And that's the part that is like you're overriding this idea, like, you know, I just got my first test back and I got a failing mark, okay. So immediately your conscious mind has to make decisions. What does it mean? Okay, it means X. And you can, what people believe though is that like they don't have, sometimes people don't believe they have a choice in what that means, right? So they think, okay, automatically, yeah, it just means that it means that I suck at this subject, right? And that would be a lot of past conditioning about like how people did in school in their past would bubble up, and all of a sudden they would just think, okay, this exam means this. They won't even be aware, right, that they have the power to think a different way about this. They could have the power and say, wait a minute, this just means I'm going to work harder. I'm going to work more tirelessly. I'm going to figure this thing out. Some people make that choice, and all of a sudden, that triggers actions, that triggers opportunities. They'll be in the tutoring center, they'll overhear a conversation between a tutor and a student in that subject now that they wouldn't have even paid attention to before. Now all of a sudden, they'll reach out and get the help that they needed, you know? So it is there. What you're doing is you're tuning yourself to receive more from everything that's around you. Yeah, from everything that's here, that's around us. You're tuning yourself in to receive that. Right?
Well, maybe not even more, but differently.
Yes, it's like you're changing the frequency, and you're able to pick up different frequencies because of that.
I call it the difference between, like my human perspective and a God perspective.
Yes.
Having a God perspective when you look at things instead of looking at from just you.
Yeah, this is very much the two-dimensional part, the conscious mind. When we tap down here is when we're getting into, the all and that cosmic, soul body that is part of us. That's like absolutely perfection. And I think that's always trying to express or lead us in certain directions. I think in my life about times where the universe will send me messages. It will send me little messages about like, hey, kind of going the wrong way. Kind of shouldn't do that, right? And I won't listen. And eventually what happens?
You run into it.
I run into a wall. Something really big comes and like knocks me off my feet and says, look it, done like playing with you. I've given you enough warnings along this way. You should have made the change. You should have made a change by now. And then all of a sudden you're forced to do it. In that moment, you think this catastrophe sucks. You think, God, it sucks that that girl I love broke up with me. It sucks that, I didn't get admitted to this school that I wanted to get into. It sucks that XYZ. Insert the thing in the moment that sucks. But usually, if we can be mindful, it's almost always an opportunity in there. There's almost always something that's an opportunity for us to like really grow into someone way better. And if we think back, I guarantee you, there's plenty of moments in your life where you're like, that catastrophe in the moment just sucked. It was terrible. But going forward 4 or 5 years, you look back at it and say, thank God that happened. Because if it didn't happen, I don't know where I'd be. I don't know what kind of thing I would turn into, right? So, and this is where I think being more in touch with the unconscious allows us to work through those moments when like, hey, when the catastrophe shows up, when like the shit really hits the fan, can I be in my breath? Can I be in my prayer? Can I be in my mindfulness and my meditation when that's going on, right? Can I be that bridge that helps me to calm this thinking mind down so that I can start giving myself the messaging that's going to allow me to work through this thing to actually better myself, to get better and better. I saw that you raised your hand a minute ago. Did you want to?
No, it'll probably come up later if we need to talk about it. But,
Yeah, for sure. So what I would suggest is practicing, mantra means mind wave. Okay, mantra is the use of sound to control and work with the physiology of the body. So ancient yogis would use mantra as a way to hone the frequency of all the cells of the body towards a specific goal. And so hearing your own voice speak out the thing that you want as if it is done is incredibly powerful when you do it consistently, because that's the override function. And you put it on a loop and you listen to it and you listen to it and you listen to it. And then all of a sudden that chief aim becomes something that you'll start to open yourself up to opportunities that are there. And things change. Like I was having a conversation at the gym with my neighbor. And he's a really good guy. He's on this path of bettering himself. He was 250 plus pounds not too long ago, and now he's down to about 225. He's lost about 25 pounds. And so he is also trying to find a new job, right? We were talking about his search because he's got a good resume. He's a programmer. He can do front-end coding and back-end coding for web design, so he can do a lot. He's got great skills. He's applied for like 20-something jobs, and he hasn't gotten a new job yet. So we're talking about it at the gym, and I said, why do you think that is? And he was like, well, I've been thinking about the current job, and I just wonder if there's a reason why I should still be here. And I said, there it is, right? What is going on with him is he has two different thoughts. He has one thought that says, I want a new job because I'm miserable in this job. And he has another thought that says, what if there's something here that I need? So what happens when we feed that conflicting information into the subconscious? Confusion, right? And you're not going to get to the thing you want. So even though he's got a phenomenal resume, he's got great skills, he's applied to like 25 jobs, he still hasn't got it, but the reason is in his own mind, right? His conscious thinking is not like solidified. It's not like 100% like, hey, I'm going to get a new job no matter what. He's not actually saying, I have a new job already, right? He's not saying those things. So he's still swirling in this, right? Neville Goddard talks about the importance of having a definite chief aim. Because when you have that definite chief aim, you push that definite chief aim forward as if it's already done, and then the universe works out the details about how you get there. And that's the key, right? That's one of the keys to doing it, There's a story, it's an interesting story. It's about a young man who's wandering, and he's very thirsty, and he's been traveling a long time. And he comes up to this beautiful, it looks like an oasis. There's a nice little pond there and a nice beautiful tree. And so he walks up and sits under the tree. And this is just a gorgeous, beautiful tree. It looks like it's something just created by the divine, right? And as soon as he sits down, he just has a thought. He says, I wish that there was some water here. I'm thirsty. I wish there was some drink here. All of a sudden, as soon as he had that thought, right there appeared all these marvelous drinks. Every drink he could imagine was right there. And he drank, and his thirst was quenched. And as soon as he sat back, he said, wow, it would be really nice to have a more comfortable place to relax. And right there was a nice hammock for him. He just relaxed back in the hammock. And he sat for a minute or so, and then he thought, I'm hungry. It would be beautiful. And now he's got the idea of what's going on, right? So he starts imagining the food that would be there. And sure enough, just as he imagines, I wish there were food, there appears all this beautiful fruits and vegetables that he can eat. He's satisfied from eating, and he lays back. And then all of a sudden, it starts to get dark. And he starts to think, oh crap, what if there are people surrounding me? And all of a sudden, he heard noises in the bushes that were surrounding him. And then he thought, well, geez, what if they accost me, and what if they kill me? Sure enough, right then, they accosted him and killed him. Right? And so this story, though, is about how sharp our conscious mind is, how sharp it is. It is a very sharp instrument. It can cut through and dissect information. It can do all kinds of amazing analysis. But how many people have firm control of that sharp instrument, the conscious mind? How many people have firm control over how they direct that sharp instrument to what it is that they want, to the exact thing they want?
Not a lot of people.
Or how many people are fumbling with that sharp instrument and they are dropping it every which way? What does it do when they fumble it? It falls. It falls. It hurts them. They cut themselves, right? By the conscious mind, right? And so this work, and so my journey really started about 4 years ago. I was going through a divorce, and I was 50 pounds overweight. I was in one of those places where I kind of felt like I was living my life in neutral, right? As if I didn't have like a real set goals, destinations, or anything that I thought was really valuable in my life. And so finally, my spouse and I still get along with her really well. I don't want to say anything I don't have anything really bad to say about her, because we were both in this situation. It was a bad situation. The relationship was falling apart. And so I had some choices to make. I could have gone the way a lot of guys do, which is like go to the bar, go get drunk, and go wash away your sorrows by drinking things away. I decided to start a yoga practice instead. And so I started a 30-day yoga practice with Adrian, and I started breathing and moving my body consciously for the first time in years. For the first time in a long time, I started moving my body consciously. And it felt great. So within a week, my body, I felt more rejuvenated. And the weird thing started happening to me. My body stopped wanting meat for some reason. No idea why. No clue why. But I know now what happened is the yoga started putting me in touch with my unconscious a little bit better, right? So I stopped eating meat. What happened next was over the next 60 days, I kept doing yoga. I stayed off the meat. I was just eating more of a vegetarian diet. I lost 25 pounds in the course of 2 months. Amazingly, right? From there, I've gotten into a lot of breath work, doing breathing techniques to help myself out, mindfulness practices, meditation, all of these things have come into my life now that have been bridges for me to connect my conscious mind to my subconscious mind. Right? And so now, do I still have some negative thoughts occasionally? Yeah, I do. I still have them. But I'm very aware when they come, how to let them go, how to understand that this is just a thought that's come in. And what I've learned is that as long as I don't attach these emotions to stories from my past conditioning, stories that other people tell me, I can experience those stories or emotions and I can just let them go, right? And then I can move on and actually get my definite chief aim, my set of goals lined up so that I can do the things that I want to do. So it's a practice for sure. Like working on this stuff is a practice. It doesn't have to be hard though, right? Remember, how we consciously imagine something to be is how it will show up, right? If I imagine, hey, I want more money, and I know I'm gonna have to work hard for it, that would have showed up. It wouldn't have been like a really great roommate landed in my house, and all of a sudden it's gonna rent a room for me. It would have been something else that was, I'm gonna be working more on weekends, and I'm gonna grind it out to get this extra money, right? So we can still tell ourselves that, right? So if someone is starting a business and they say, my business is not gonna pay, I'm not gonna make a lot of money for 3 years. And if you keep that thought, by gosh, you're gonna produce that, right? But all of this stuff it happens all the time, right? Has anyone ever heard of the placebo effect?
Yes.
So what happens with the placebo effect?
You tell yourself something so much that it happens even though it's not happening,
Yeah.
kind of. Like false pregnancies with women.
Yes. So you convince yourself that the thing is what it is. So all of a sudden, you given a sugar pill, right? You're told that it will cure your ulcers, and all of a sudden your ulcers get better. Now they're not going to tell you that you just got a sugar pill, but what was working within you is all of a sudden your conscious mind said, yep, this medicine's going to work. It's done. As soon as the conscious mind said, yep, it's going to work, it's done, that message went down to the subconscious. What did the subconscious say?
That doesn't hurt anyone.
I know how to handle this shit, right? What does the subconscious do? It heals basically everything, right? You cut your finger, do you consciously think about that? Like, yeah, I hope this heals. Your subconscious mind takes care of it, right? Simple and easy, right? So the subconscious is like, I know how to handle this.
It's like walking and breathing
Yeah.
and all that. We do it unconsciously most of the time.
Yes, and that's the way of getting in touch with the subconscious too, is that we consciously control breathing, but then when we sleep, the subconscious is what breathes us too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is the way to create that bridge, right? It's consciously breathing. Like if you take one deep belly breath and you breathe to the bottom of your belly, you can almost instantly clear your mind. You can pretty much almost instantly clear your mind.
Focused on
Because
breathing.
you're focused on the breath, right? The other thing too is if you hold your breath for just a short pause, right? Let's say I hold my breath for 5 seconds. I do a 5-second breath pause, right? If the thinking mind is going crazy, all of a sudden I'm in overactive imagination mode, which is like, oh shit, this might happen, that might happen, oh crap, this and this and this, right? All of a sudden, all the stories start, right? Everything is going crazy. When you breathe and then you stop breathing for 5 seconds, this conscious mind will slow down. Because all of a sudden, what happens is the subconscious says, wait a minute, dude man's not breathing. Like, we're gonna actually intervene. we're gonna slow that thinking down.
So it wakes it up.
So it actually slows this thinking down, so that you're in that state of anxiety and worry. All of a sudden, you can bring that down to a quiet, right? And then all of a sudden, you're in a much better state of ease, a state of calmness, and you're able to go through whatever it is that you're processing through. Did you want to say something, Hector? Okay. So I would just say, whatever journey you're on, I think the most important thing is self-love.
Mm-hmm.
Finding a way to love yourself, because in our culture, that idea of self-love is not taught to us very much. Like, we're taught better to give than receive. We're taught that, and that idea of better to give than receive, it's actually should be better to give than receive, because they're a continuum. Giving and receiving is a continuum. It's the two things that work together. Why do we give from our heart space? Because there's a balance of giving and receiving. The heart beats to give, relaxes to receive, right? The blood goes back to the heart because the heart relaxes. The heart pumps, and it gives vital life to the rest of the system, relaxes to receive back, pumps to give. That's the balance between giving and receiving. So I would say, try to be your best friend and treat yourself the way that you would treat your best friend as you're working along your journey and your continuum. Because if you make this something that's light and something that is not this sense of force, because the more you force is the harder it gets. The more you force. So if you're approaching anything from a sense that you're going to force this into submission, right? The people will say, I'm going to force my weight loss into submission. I'm going to lose 20 pounds come hell or high water. They might starve themselves for a week or two, right? They might go on a crash diet and they might eat, 1,000 calories a day for 2 weeks. When that 2 weeks is up, their body is totally wiped out. They don't have anything left in them. And then they go back and they binge eat and they go back on that cycle. But that's force, as opposed to coming at it from a perspective of loving yourself, caring for yourself.
Smaller portion.
Yeah, smaller portions or whatever. But even just accepting yourself for where you're at and not being highly critical of yourself as you make the journey, because that self-criticism filters down into the subconscious mind too. So even if we're doing it in a way to try to motivate ourselves, we can end up with these circumstances where we're hurting ourselves by telling ourselves these negative things about ourselves. And so that was a big journey for me too, because I had to learn that. I wasn't taught that. I mean, I love my parents, I love my family. They didn't have those tools though. They didn't have those tools to teach me that. So I had to learn that myself, learn self-acceptance and self-love. And so whatever journey you're on, I would say, keep that as a cornerstone for what it is you do. Because if you unconditionally, without condition, love yourself, your unconscious mind will set on fire to go about and find ways to get you whatever it is that you want to achieve. It will work tirelessly for you. In fact, even if you don't have unconditional love for yourself, this constantly works on your behalf to bring about the reality that your conscious mind tells it to. Right? So just, wherever you are, because we're all on these journeys trying to bring something about of value and meaning in our lives, just be kind and gentle to yourself. That matters the most. And if you do that and you get into some of these practices, yoga, breathwork, prayer, mindfulness, meditation, you'll bridge some of this gap and then imagine the thing already done, the thing that you want.
Mm-hmm. And it makes sense that, you would need to have an expectation that you have value and that you should love yourself, because otherwise the rest of this is pointless. Why would I do all this work for somebody who doesn't deserve it?
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, and that's the cornerstone that I think is there. Yes.
The one thing I would point out about loving yourself is learning what love is.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to learn how to do that. With women, the first thing is get your hair done, do your nails, pamper yourself. So I started off with that, and then I'm broke, so I can't really do too much of that,
Yeah.
And then I had learned that it was more of an inner loving, boundaries and treating yourself as you would treat someone else. And because I was always about loving others, so I was good at that.
Yeah.
So I just had to kind of turn that around to myself.
Yeah.
And I had to learn how to say no.
Yeah.
Boundaries.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole side of, you could have a whole class on loving yourself.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to it as well, and I think what you mentioned about like sending all your love out but not loving yourself,
Mm-hmm.
in ways that's very depleting for you. as
You
an
have to feed
individual.
it.
Well, yeah, because what you're doing is you're working from a half-empty cup in that case.
Mhm.
You know, so whatever you give from that place of lack is like stealing from yourself, and whether you know it or not, a lot of times you're trying to curry favor, right?
Yeah.
And so you're trying to curry acceptance from others by giving, when you're not giving from a place of abundance. So when you practice and you take good care of yourself, your cup overflows, right? And then
Mhm.
everything you give comes from a place of infinite abundance. And so when you give, it's not like you're emptying your cup. It's like, no, the cup is overflowing. Let's just let this
God,
slosh
thanks.
out and slosh all over the place, because that's the place that you want to give from. But you only get there by loving yourself first,
Mhm.
giving to yourself. And like you said, it's not about like going to get a pedicure or going and getting stuff. You know, the five sensory data, this is what our culture tells us, which is like, if you're a guy and you go buy that new sports car, you're gonna feel great.
No, it's empty. That's
you,
no value.
You don't. You might feel good for a day or two. You might feel good for even a month, say. But it doesn't buy you the happiness that you're looking for. It just
Mhm.
doesn't, right? And so it is from within that we find the happiness. I would say that love yourself, and the other part is gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
Gratitude's a practice as well. When we practice gratitude, we feel so much happier. It's like the stepping stone to happiness. Gratitude is the thing that allows us to be happy. When we really start to imagine the things that we are grateful for, you're not going to be in a state of anxiety and worry when you're operating from a place of gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And when you operate from that place of gratitude, you give and you feel better, right? That's where you start to get into happiness. And that's where you can also start to work on things like forgiveness and self-love, because all of a sudden, what is forgiveness is to give yourself forward, right, to the present moment. It's not to deny the past moments that were bad, and to say this thing was bad and you know, to deny that it even happened. It's to accept that it happened, but to allow yourself to go forward without the baggage, because that's the weight that holds us down, right? If we forgive, then we give ourselves forward away from the thing that was holding us back.
I kind of put my life in two sections: before being aware and after being aware. And I forgive myself for everything before I was aware.
Yeah. And when you're working on yourself like this, it's very valuable to unconditionally love your old self
Mm-hmm.
when you were in the midst of things and when you made past mistakes. Because when you do that, what you're doing is you're creating that kindness that your old self needed.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times the old self might have done something, and now you look back from a more enlightened place, from a place of higher consciousness, and you might say, that was not a good thing to do. But always look back with a sense of care and respect, because you always were doing the best you could in your past. Whatever it was you were doing, even if you were drinking yourself to sleep because you needed to numb yourself, right, because of the pain or whatever it was, you know that you want to give yourself love from those moments.
Will that old self of you still be part of you? Because I think it is, but it's hidden within your unconscious mind, but it's still part of you, and it will always will be.
Yeah.
Because your unconscious mind will never forget what you've done. It's sort of made you what you are. So if you try to forget what you were, that your unconscious mind will not work. So your unconscious mind is built on your past and what you've done and what you are going to achieve.
Yeah.
So is that old self of you still part of you when you achieve something new?
I think so, and that's the reason why I think it's important to send kind, loving energy to your old selves too, because those old bodies, those old selves live in you still. That 16-year-old kid that did that stupid thing, or that did that thing that you were embarrassed by today, is still a part of you, and you really want to send and extend love to that old version of you, because it's still a part of you, right? And this gets into, like, you know, there's the now version of you, there's the you from 10 seconds ago. Is there a difference between them?
Yes, because we're learning right now.
We are, right? With every beat of the heart, right? With every single beat of the heart, your bone marrow creates 2 million red blood cells. Every single beat of the heart, boom, boom, 2 million, boom, boom, 2 million. Now, we think 2 million is a lot, right? How many cells in the whole body?
I don't know.
Like 7 trillion, 10 trillion sometimes, depending on the person, right? So there's trillions of cells in the body. So 2 million is not a lot. But when you're beating your heart, when your heart beats and you produce those 2 million red blood cells, the bone marrow, especially in the thighs, your thighs are the place where most of the marrow is, 2 million red blood cells, right? When you're in a meditative, breathing, prayer state, mindful state, you're in that calm state, right, that's there, those 2 million red blood cells are imbibed with that energy that you carry with you. And those will carry you forward with that better positive energy. So the more time you spend doing these things, is the more calm you can become, is the more ease that you can have in your life. Whereas the opposite is also true, because as your heart's beating and you're in that emotional heightened state, you're in that very active sympathetic nervous system state, right? Fight or flight. That's active while those 2 million red blood cells are coming in. Those are colored with the electromagnetic charges of how your state of being is, right? So some yogis even say that if you brought yourself to complete calmness for 24 hours, you'd be set. You could get to enlightenment just by 24 hours of clear thinking, of clear just being present and being in that theta state, in that meditative mindful state. Because how much 24 hours of 2 million red blood cells, right, on the beat of the heart, I mean, what's flowing through you after that? Whew, you're gonna feel pretty good. Yes.
Can you go over the mindfulness a little bit, like
Yeah.
how to achieve that? Because I get I have like ADHD that hasn't been diagnosed. I know it because I am constantly like, I can go for 48 hours. I will have to be told, hey, you realize you haven't slept in the last 48 hours, and my body just goes.
Yeah.
And
so I try to create little things in my life that do change of state, like a change of state. So if I notice myself going towards that like frantic, because I was like that too.
Anxiety.
I was very had a lot of anxiety about what if this happens, what if that happens, and the depression too. But if I got myself going too much, or I get myself going, I have little tools that I use now to make myself a little bit more mindful. One go-to I have is I just go to a sink and I'll run cold water over my hands. It's a very simple act. And then what I do is I just pay attention to the feeling of the cold water on my hands. And I'll just put my hands under the cold water and I'll rub my hands like this. And I'll really feel the experience of that, right? All of a sudden, I'm very much in the present moment at that time. Then what I might do also is pair that with belly breaths. Pair that with deep belly breathing.
So learn the breathing.
Yeah. So next week at 11, I'm doing a breathwork class where I'm going to teach about 10 different types of breathing exercises that can help us to become more mindful, to find ways to get into that, I call it the theta state. It's the state where just before you go to sleep, what I would suggest just before going to sleep is you want to give yourself really positive messaging just before you go to sleep, because that's the state where your conscious and subconscious are coming together. So just before going to sleep is when you really want to have those positive thoughts going through your head, even if it's like a positive meditation that is from someone else, that's fine, right? As long as it's there and it's creating that sense of abundance, a sense of that you're loved, that you're respected.
I was going to say saying that I am loved,
yes.
I am chosen.
Yes.
I am.
And it's so great to say I am as opposed to I will be, because I am is it's done.
Right.
And when your subconscious hears I am, it knows it's over, right? And that's where the real power is.
Now, is the breathing thing, is that one of these skill sessions?
Yeah, so the next skill session is really going to focus on the breath work. And I'm going to teach about 6 or 7 different breaths, and we're going to practice them in the classroom. So we're actually going to do the breathing, and we're going to talk about how we feel after doing the breaths and what physiologically we were able to change.
Probably lightheaded.
Well, sometimes we can, depending on the breath. So there's some breaths like Wim Hof teaches a breath work technique where you can actually hold your breath for 2 minutes without any stress, without any problem. You fully oxygenate yourself by rapid breathing. You fill your lungs up and empty, fill and empty, fill and empty for about 32 breaths in and out rapidly. And you can basically lay out after that without breathing for 2 minutes very comfortably. And so what Hoff talks about is his breath technique is allowing us a bridge between the conscious and unconscious minds, because the more that we can tap into the power of the unconscious is the more we can kind of control the reality, the things that we want in our lives, right? The stuff that we want. We can invite more happiness, more love, more wealth, more abundance into our lives by tapping into the subconscious mind. And it connects to the universal mind, and all of a sudden things show up, right?
Where would I read about this universal mind? Like, is there a book that's good for that?
Yeah, so I would check out Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Think and Grow Rich?
Yeah, by Napoleon Hill. So Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate, and he gave so much money away. This guy was amazing what he gave away. He met Napoleon Hill, who was a reporter, and Napoleon Hill went to interview Carnegie, and Carnegie was so impressed by Napoleon Hill that he had a proposal for him. He invited him back and said, I'd like you for the next 20 years to go and interview and study the wealthiest, most successful people on planet Earth. And I want you to interview them, and then I want you to write about it. So for 20 years, Napoleon Hill traveled the world, interviewing people like Vanderbilt, Ford, all of these successful business people. And then he wrote about how they did it. And a lot of what Napoleon Hill talks about is in a lot of this stuff that I'm talking about here. It is having a definite chief aim, right? So one of the first stories in that book you'll find really fascinating is there's a gentleman who wanted to be Thomas Edison's partner. And his goal was, I'm going to be Thomas Edison's partner. That was his definite chief aim. He didn't say, I want to work for Thomas Edison. He said, I'm going to be Thomas Edison's partner. I don't care. I don't know how it's going to happen. It's going to happen. So he sold off all the stuff that he had. He got his money together, and he traveled to New York where Edison was. He showed up at Edison's door and said, Thomas Edison, I'd like to be your partner. And Edison said, how about I hire you maybe instead? So he took that as a hire. But he knew, he always kept the knowing that I'm going to be his partner someday. Well, Edison had this invention that wasn't selling good, but he knew there could be a market for it. This guy volunteered to go sell it. He sold so much of it that Edison made him partner. Right? Now, it didn't happen overnight, but it happened within those years, and he actually did it. I would check out a couple other authors. Neville Goddard.
Yeah, can you spell it? Neville?
N-E-V. Yeah, let me write them down.
Yeah, that would help.
So Neville Goddard.
Yeah, because you mentioned a couple in the beginning, but I didn't catch them.
Joseph Murphy.
Now, any of their books?
Yeah, they're going to write about a lot of stuff. So this one here, Power of the Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murphy. I'll just grab a better marker here. This one's phenomenal. You're going to probably want to read this several times over.
So buy it.
Yeah. So I would get Joseph Murphy, Earl Nightingale. There's another one, Napoleon Hill. So those are some of the authors that I would suggest. And some of the books are really short. So like Neville Goddard has one called The 7-Day Mental Diet. And it's like 30-something pages long, right? And you in particular will love Goddard's work because what Goddard talks a lot about is
prayer.
The science of prayer.
Okay.
A lot of his books are about that science of prayer. And they're short and they're really just on point. And he has great work that covers some of this stuff. It's really good. So those are the authors that I've been reading as I've started to work on this stuff. And there's a guy on YouTube that you want to check out. His name is Joseph Rodriguez.
Joseph.
On YouTube. One last one I would absolutely recommend is Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda.
Oh yeah, you're gonna have to write that one.
Yeah. My markers all seem to be failing.